Hello, everyone. Hello, YouTubers. This is Anonymous T. Hope you're having an amazing day today. So today we're going to discuss these banned books that's in Texas, but actually this is happening across the U.S. with several school districts and parents having various complaints on certain books that are contained in the school's libraries. So let's get right back to it. And I will, of course, link the article in the description box. I always cite my sources. So it says the following from NBCnews.com. It says, banned books on race and sexuality are disappearing from Texas schools in record numbers. Facing pressure from parents and threats of criminal charges, some districts have ignored policies meant to prevent censorship. Librarians and students are pushing back. From a secluded spot in her high school library, a 17-year-old girl spoke softly into her cell phone, worried that somebody might overhear her say the things she's hidden from her parents for years. They don't know she's queer, the student told a reporter, and given their past comments about homosexuality as being a sin, she long feared they would learn her secret if they saw what she reads in the library. That space, with its endless rows of books about characters from all sorts of backgrounds, have been her safe haven, she said, one of the few places where she feels completely free to be herself. But books, including one of her recent favorites, have been vanishing from the shelves of Katy Independent School District libraries the past few months. Gone. Jack of the Hearts and Other Parts, a book she read last year about a gay teenager who isn't shy about discussing his adventurous sex life. Also banished, The Handsome Girl and Her Beautiful Boy, All Boys Aren't Blue, and Lawn Boy, all coming-of-age stories that promptly feature LGBTQ characters and passages about sex. Some titles were removed after parents formally complained, but others were quietly banned by the district without official reviews. As I've struggled with my own identity as a queer person, it's been really important to me that I have access to these books, said the girl, who NBC News is not naming to avoid revealing her sexuality. And I'm sure it's really important to other queer kids. You should be able to see yourself reflected in the page. Her safe haven is now a battleground in an unprecedented effort by parents and conservative politicians in Texas to ban books dealing with race, sexuality, and gender from schools. An NBC News investigation has found hundreds of titles have been pulled from libraries across the state for review, sometimes over the objections of school librarians, several of whom told NBC News they face increasingly hostile work environments and mounting pressure to preemptively pull books that might draw complaints. Records requests to nearly 100 school districts in the Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin regions, a small sampling of the state's 1,250 public school systems, revealed 75 formal requests by parents or community members to ban books from libraries during their first 4 months of the school year. In comparison, only one library book challenge was filed at those districts during the same time period a year earlier, records show. A handful of the districts reported challenges more this year than any of the past 2 decades combined. All but a few of the challenges this school year targeted books dealing with racism or sexuality, the majority of them featuring LGBTQ characters and explicit descriptions of sex. Many of the books under fire are newer titles purchased by school librarians in recent years as part of a nationwide movement to diversify the content available in public school children. Why are we sexualizing our precious children? A Katy parent said at a November school board meeting after she suggested that the books about LGBTQ relationships are causing children to improperly question their gender identities and sexual orientations. Why are our libraries filled with pornography? Another parent in Katy, a Houston suburb, asked the district to remove a children's biography of Michelle Obama, arguing that it promotes reverse racism. That's not a thing. Against white people, according to the records obtained by NBC News. A parent in the Dallas suburb of Prosper wanted the school district to ban a children's picture book about the life of a black Olympian, Wilma Rudolph, because it mentions racism that Rudolph faced growing up in Tennessee in the 1940s. In the affluent Ames Independent School District in Austin, a parent proposed replacing 4 books about racism, including How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, with copies of the Bible. Similar debates are rolling in communities across the country, fueled by parents, activists, and Republican politicians who have mobilized against school programs and classroom lessons focused on LGBTQ issues and the legacy of racism in America. Last fall, some national groups involved in that effort, including No Left Turn in Education and Moms for Liberty, began circulating lists of library books that they said were, quote, indoctrinating kids to a dangerous ideology. And during his successful bid for governor in Virginia, Republican Glenn Youngkin made parents' opposition to explicit books a central theme in the final stretch of his campaign, leading some GOP strategists to flag the issue as a winning strategy heading into the 2002 midterm elections. The fight particularly heated in Texas, where Republican state officials, including Governor Greg Abbott, have gone as far as calling for criminal charges against any school staff member who provides children with access to young adult novels that some conservatives have labeled as pornography. Separately, State Rep Matt Krause, a Republican, made a list of 850 titles dealing with racism or sexuality that may, quote, make students feel discomfort, and demanded that Texas school districts investigate whether the books were in their libraries. A group of Texas school librarians have launched a social media campaign to push back. There have always been efforts to censor books, but what we're seeing right now is frankly unprecedented, said Carolyn Foote, a retired school librarian in Austin, who's helping lead the, quote, Freedom Campaign. A library is a place of voluntary inquiry. That means when a student walks in, they are not forced to check out a book that they or their parents find objectionable, but they also don't have the authority to say what books should or shouldn't be available to other students. 10 currently or recently retired Texas school librarians who spoke to a reporter described growing fears that they could be attacked by parents on social media or threatened with criminal charges. Some, they have said, quietly removed LGBTQ affirming books from shelves or declined to purchase new ones to avoid public criticism, raising fears about what free speech advocates call, quote, a wave of soft censorship in Texas and across the country. 5 of the librarians said that they were thinking about leaving the profession, and one already has. Sarah Chase, a longtime librarian at Carroll Senior High School in South Lake, a Fort Worth suburb, said that the acrimony over books contributed to her decision to retire in December, months earlier than she planned. I am no saint, said Chase, 55. I got out because I was afraid to stand up to the attacks. I didn't want to be caught in somebody else's snare. Who wants to be called a pornographer? Who wants to be accused of being a pedophile or reported to the police for putting a book in a kid's hand? In interviews and recorded comments at school board meetings, parents who've pushed for book removals have described doing everything in their power to shield their children from sexually explicit content on the internet, only to discover it's readily available in school libraries. It's not censoring to guard minors from exposure to adult-themed books, Christine Mangus, a parent, said at a meeting in November of the Keller Independent School District Board of Trustees, a suburban district outside of Fort Worth that's fielded dozens of requests to ban books in recent months. If they choose to check out from the public with a parent, then so be it. But if there's no reason whatsoever to have these books in our schools, some are protesting. Parents have insisted that their opposition is about sexually explicit books, regardless of the racist or sexual orientations of the characters. They point out that some of the books being challenged feature heterosexual sex scenes, but in many instances, parents and GOP politicians have flagged books about racism and LGBTQ issues that don't include explicit language, including some picture books about Black historical figures and transgender children. Free speech advocates and authors deny that any of the books in question meet the legal definition of pornography. Although some include sexually explicit passages or drawings, those scenes are presented in the context of broader narratives and not for the explicit purpose of sexual stimulation, they said. Some parents want to pretend that books are the source of darkness in kids' lives, said Ashley Hope Perez, author of the young adult novel Out of Darkness, which has been repeatedly targeted by Texas parents for its depiction of a rape scene and other mature content. The reality for most kids is that difficulties, challenges, harm, oppression, those are present in their lives, and books that reflect that reality can help make them feel less alone. Several queer students, meanwhile, said the arguments by some parents, specifically the idea that it's inappropriate for teenagers to read about LGBTQ sexual relationships, are making them feel unwelcome in their communities. Reading books or consuming any type of media that has LGBTQ representation, it doesn't turn people gay or make people turn out a certain way, said Amber. Call, a 17-year-old bisexual student, and Katie, I think reading those books help kids realize that the feelings that they have already had are valid, okay, and I think that's what a lot of these parents are opposed to. Short-circuiting the process. This fall wasn't the first time Texas parents packed the school board meeting rooms to complain about the corrupting influence of books. Every year for nearly 2 decades, beginning in the late 1990s, the Texas chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union surveyed every public and charter school in Texas to document attempts to ban library books. The annual reports paint a picture of past censorship movements and make clear that the volume of challenges now hitting schools is unlike anything previously recorded in the state. In the early 2000s, a conservative backlash to the Harry Potter book series, which some Christian leaders condemned as a satanic depiction of witchcraft, fueled a surge of book banning attempts in Texas, according to the ACLU data. But even at the peak of that wave, the Texas ACLU never documented more than 151 school library book challenges in 1 year. About half of that many were documented in just the first 4 months of the 2021 school year, at only a small sampling of Texas school districts, according to the records obtained by NBC News. During the 2018-2019 school year, the last time ACLU conducted the censorship survey, Texas schools reported only 17 library book challenges statewide. Twice as many have been filed so far the school year at Keller ISD alone. I have been doing this work for 20 years, and I've never seen the volume of challenges that we're seeing right now, said Deborah Cowell-Stone, director of the Office of Intellectual Freedom at the American Library Association, which tracks attempts to ban library books nationwide. Caldwell-Stone said the number of Texas book challenges documented in the records obtained by NBC News likely a vast undercount because it doesn't account for books that are being removed from shelves based off of verbal complaints at board meetings or parent emails, often in violation of school district policies. In response to past censorship movements, the American Library Association developed guidelines for schools to prevent the sudden and arbitrary removal of books. Under the guidelines, which have been adopted by most large districts in Texas and nationally, parents are also asked to fill out forms explaining why they believe a book should be banned. Then a committee of school employees and community volunteers reviews the books in its entirety and determines whether it meets district standards, keeping in mind that a parent's ability to control what students can read extends only to his or her own child, according to language included in most district policies. A challenge book is supposed to remain on shelves and available to students while the committee deliberates, and the final decisions should be made public, Caldwell-Stone said. What we're seeing these days is a short-circuiting of that process, despite the fact that school boards often do have these reconsideration policies on their own books. They are ignoring them to respond to the controversy and the moral panics that they are getting targeted with the school board meetings, and books are being abruptly removed. That scenario has been repeated at several Texas school districts in recent months, NB News has found. District near Dallas made headlines when administrators pulled down a copy of All Boys Aren't Blue, a memoir by queer Black author George M. Johnson, after learning that parents in neighboring towns had concerns about it. A district spokesperson, Julie Zwar, said school officials are now reviewing a total of 11 library books to determine whether they are perversely vulgar, even though the district has received only one formal book challenge this year. The Northeast Independent School District in San Antonio hasn't received any library book challenges from parents as of December, according to records provided to NBC News. But that month, administrators directed library to box up more than 400 titles dealing with race, sexuality, and gender. At a subsequent school meeting, Northeast leaders said that they had pulled the books for review after Krause, the Republican lawmaker, distributed his list of 850 titles that he said violate new state laws governing how sex and race are addressed in Texas classrooms. Northeast spokesperson Aubrey Chancellor did not respond to a reporter's request for comment, but told the Texas Tribune in December that the district asked the staff to review books on cross lists to ensure that they did not have any obscene or vulgar material in them. For us, this is not about politics or censorship, but rather about ensuring parents choose what is appropriate for their minor children, she said then. On another instance, the Carroll Independent School District in Southlake, responding to an NBC News public records request, reported that it had received 0 library book challenges in 2021, but emails reviewed by a reporter showed that a parent had complained informally in August to a Carroll administrator and 2 school board meetings about the book, Beyond Magenta Transgender Teens Speak Out by Susan Colklin. There's extreme sexual content in that book that isn't even appropriate for me to put in an email, the parent wrote. Rather than requiring the mom to fill out a form to initiate the school's former library review process, Chase, the recently retired Carroll librarian, said in an administrator email that shared the email with her and another librarian. In order to avoid conflict, they agreed to remove the book from high school shelves. I hate that we did this because we didn't go through the formal review ourselves, Chase said. I think a lot of librarians are making decisions out of fear, and that puts us in a position of self-censorship. Books Fight spreads from Virginia to Texas. Mary Ellen Cuozella, a mother of 3 in Katy, sprawling and booming suburb outside of Houston, had never thought about much of the library books her kids might have accessed at school, but in September she heard then candidate Youngkin mention at a Virginia school district's fight over sexually explicit material in the book in the library during this campaign for governor against Democrat Terry McAuliffe. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. Curious, Cuozella searched the Katy Independent School District's catalog and was surprised to find that one of the books at the center of the Virginia fight, Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison, was available at her children's high school. Cuozella picked up a copy from the public library and was absolutely amazed by what she read. She said the book, which traces the story of a Mexican-American's character's journey to understand his own sexuality and ethnic identity, was filled with vulgarity, Cuozella said, including dozens of 4-letter words, explicit sexual references, and description of oral sex between 4th grade boys during a church youth group meeting. What? I don't care whether or not you're straight, gay, transgender, gender fluid, any race, she said. That book had it all and was degrading for all kinds of people. She soon discovered that several other young adult books had been targeted in Virginia and other Texas districts were available at Katy ISD. Cuozella shared her findings with some of the like-minded parents, and together they set out to get administrators to do something. The school system, a diverse district of nearly 85,000 students, had already made national headlines that fall when administrators temporarily removed copies of New Kid and Class Act by Jerry Craft from school libraries after parents complained that the graphic novels about black 7th graders at a mostly white school would indoctrinate students of color with a victim mentality and make some kids feel guilty for being white. What? But Cuozella said that she and her friends were having a hard time getting K administrators to take their concerns about sexually explicit books seriously, so they hatched a plan. On November 15th, she and 5 other moms showed up at Katy school board meeting with a stack of books. One by one, they took turns at the lectern during public comments. Cuozella implored the board to audit all of the district's library books and get rid of those that are too obscene to read aloud in public. If you're filtering a student's internet access, she said, why are we not filtering the library? Minutes later, Jennifer Adler, mother of 5, held up a copy of Jack of Hearts and Other Parts by Elsie Rosen for the board to see. Adler explained that the book was about a character named Jack who writes a teen advice column for an online site, and then she began reading. I wonder how he does it, how he gets all that D. Adler said, reading the first series of explicit excerpts referring to anal and oral sex. OMG. After ending with a passage that included a detailed description of male genitalia and advice on how to give oral sex, she looked up at the board members, her voice shaking as she spoke. I can't even imagine how I would feel if my child came home with this type of book, said Adler, whose oldest child is in middle school. We can't unread this type of content, and I would like to protect my kids' hearts, minds from this. Audience packed with parents and community members who shared her concerns erupted in applause. Take the matter seriously. Rosen, the author of Jack and Hearts, wasn't surprised when he heard about the demands to ban his book in Katy. Like other authors whose books haven't been targeted in recent months, Rosen said parents have been reading passages out of context. At the time of the book's release in 2015, the School Library Journal, a magazine that districts rely on to select library books, wrote the death of sex-positive queer literature and made Jack of Hearts an essential addition to library collections that serve teens. The sex advice columns written by the book's protagonists are a bigger part of the narrative that's meant to empower queer teens and help them feel safe talking about their sexuality, Rosen said. All of the questions answered in Jack's advice column were submitted by real students, Rosen said, and the author consulted with sex education experts to write Jack's responses with the goal of providing LGBTQ teens with practical information that's often omitted from sex ed classes. I think it's troubling when they can't distinguish between porn, which is not meant for education, and a book like mine that's trying to educate teenagers and tell them it's okay to have these desires. Here's how to act on them consensually and safely, Rosen said. Cruella and her allies who denied that they were specifically targeting LGBTQ content saw things differently, as so did Katy ISD leaders, according to internal messages obtained by NBC News. Rather than asking the parents to file formal challenges or forming a committee to review the books that they read about, Darlene Rankin, the school district's director of instructional technology, sent an email that day after the school board meeting directing the school staff to immediately remove 2 titles of all libraries, Jack of Hearts and Forever for a Year. If these books are currently checked out to students, you must contact the student in order to have the book returned, wrote Rankin, who declined an interview request. The weeks that followed, Katy parents continued applying pressure, calling on the district not only to audit libraries for vulgar content, but also to overhaul the selection process and de-emphasize recommendations from prominent book review journals, arguing that those groups are pushing a liberal agenda. In early December, Superintendent Ken Gregorski responded to those demands, announcing in a letter to all parents that the district was launching a broad review of its library books to remove any that might be considered, quote, pervasively vulgar. Gregorski, who declined to be interviewed, invited parents to report other books they wanted removed and assured them that he would ensure the district is taking the matter seriously and putting it into action the plans that resolve the issues for which we were all concerned. In total this school year, according to internal messages, the district has launched reviews into at least 30 library books and so far has deemed 9 to be inappropriate for students at any grade level, including 5 that prominently feature LGBTQ characters. Several other books, including This Is Your Time by the civil rights era icon Ruby Bridges, were deemed inappropriate or too mature for young children and removed from either their elementary or middle school libraries. Most of these reviews were open without a formal book challenge, records show, even though one is required under Katy's ISD local policy. In at least 2 instances, according to 3 district employees with knowledge of the review process, senior district administrators have ordered books to be removed from libraries even after review committees examined them and voted to keep them in schools. The district employees spoke to a reporter on the condition of anonymity and worried that they might be disciplined for sharing their concerns publicly. In response to a detailed written questions, Katy ISD spokesperson Maria DePetta wrote that the district will have to kindly pass on your request. After this story's publication, DePetta followed up to say that the district declined a parent's request to remove the children's books about Michelle Obama. Kuzella said she's pleased that the district is now taking her concerns seriously and hopes administrators go further, although she doesn't believe most librarians are knowingly stocking shelves with, quote, pornographic material. She agrees with Abbott's call for criminal charges against any who do, including Katy. We have laws in Texas providing sexually explicit material to children. She said it's a law in the books, and if they knowingly are providing this, they need to be advised and investigated. Foote, the retired school librarian who's leading a statewide campaign against book bans, said Katy's approach is flawed, not only because it lacks transparency and opens the door for additional censorship attempts, but because of the signal it sends. You can't overstate the impact these decisions have on LGBTQ students and even teachers, Foote said. Intentional or not, these bans are sending a message to them about their place in the community. On the phone at her high school library, the queer Katy student who worries her parents won't accept her for who she is said that she is outraged when she found out librarians had started removing books, especially Jack of Hearts. For me, a lot of these books offer hope, the student said. I'm going to be going to college soon, and I'm really looking forward to that and the freedom that it offers. Until then, my greatest adventure is going to be through reading. Like other library books she read that centered upon LGBTQ characters, the student said, Jack of Hearts gave her a sense of validation. The main character, 17-year-old, who isn't shy about his love for partying, makeup, and boys, was a sharp contrast to her own high school experience, constantly on guard against saying or doing anything that might lead her to being outed. The book, she said, made her feel less alone. Rosen, the author, has simply heard similar things from other teenagers when he gets those messages. He said he usually replies to say that he hopes things will get better. OMG, 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 OMG. I will say this. I feel that the reason why this is now escalating into other genres and other things, this started by removing books about racism. That is really the core issue. They are trying to loop in as an afterthought the LGBTQ books, but the real issue is the books that are calling out the racism, especially in a conservative state like Texas. That is the issue at hand. The issue at hand is once we got to a point with George Floyd and people started to lose their jobs or being held accountable for their racism, now all of a sudden Texas started to lead the charge in wanting books about racism removed because they felt, okay, well, if we can't be open about our racism, then we also need to remove books that teach about racism as well, so that it's just not discussed at all and it's completely removed from these schools. And some schools don't even teach Black history. And I know for me, when I was in high school, we had a Black history teacher who taught, I think, 2 Black history classes. So that was very important, you know, for something like where I went to high school at and everything else, to have that. And it was taught by a Black teacher. So it's just very interesting. I think the issues regarding the books that they're, quote, trying to claim are racist is they don't want certain people to hold themselves accountable for the racism that takes place and took place in the past and still takes place now and will take place in the future. As for the books that they are saying are pornographic, if it is going against Texas law, then that is something that needs to be investigated. However, what is the definition of pornographic in the books that they are referencing? Are these books like completely filled with nothing but filth and sex scenes, or what are you guys classifying as porn? First of all, like within the books, is it just like they're not allowed to hold hands or kiss in the book, or does it go further in the books? Like, how far are we talking? However, a couple of the books that I did reference did sound like they were a little beyond, you know, the holding hands and kissing. So, but I'm surprised though, because really we didn't even like get into explicit books or explicit filming or things of that nature really until college. So, but I don't know if, you know, things have changed over the years, but we've never had that when I was in school, any issues at the library about any books that were there. So I'm very curious. I don't know if it's just more so that the books have changed over the years, or if people are just now being more sensitive or more outraged at like everything now. Like that part, I don't know. But I do know for a fact that the issue stems from the books about racism. That I do know. I think they are latching on to these other stuff just to latch onto it to see if it'll stick. But the real issue at hand is they were upset about the books that were calling out the racism. And to try to have a children's book that Michelle Obama wrote is just disgusting. Like, come on, you guys. Seriously? And then the book that the Olympian wrote, that she experienced racism just because that was written in the book, that you don't want it in there. Like, how can you denounce her experience? And that's why there's arguments now. That's like why people have issues now, is why can certain people have, you know, measures in place that if somebody calls out racism or says something that's inappropriate, immediate action is taken. But if it is regarding the Black community, then there's all of these other things that are in play. The action isn't as swift as, you know, it needs to be. And people then start picking and choosing and trying to remove Black history altogether. And that's a huge issue. That is a huge issue because everybody needs to learn. Everybody needs to be educated. Everybody needs to learn what the truth is and what actually took place. So that is my thoughts. I think this is all stemming from trying to get rid of Black history books and trying to remove Black history altogether from Texas school districts. I think that is the core issue at hand. That is the core. So let me know what you guys think. Do you guys agree or disagree? Have you guys heard of any of these books? Do any of you guys have children who are at any of these schools that are now having these board meetings discussing the books that are at the libraries across the country? What do you guys think about this? Because I've definitely seen it on my local news quite a bit in different states as far as these board meetings that the parents are having at these high schools about these books that are in the libraries and trying to have them removed. So it's very interesting, but it's like something that's kind of sweeping the nation right now. But I feel like I said, the core is the books that address the racism. That is really what their main concern is trying to get those books out so that they don't have to address or have a conversation with their children about, you know, racism or the history of racism or whether or not they're racist as well. I think that is the stem of all of this. So let me know what you guys think. If you guys agree or disagree, please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification button so you're notified the moment I post new content on my channel. And with that being said, I will talk to you guys again soon.